Lightyear is the newest film from Pixar and marks the first time that we have seen a film from the animation studio in theaters since March of 2020. But was this film worth the wait, and does it live up to its predecessor's legacy? Let's find out. As someone who is a huge fan of the Toy Story films, I have to admit, initially, the idea of a Buzz Lightyear solo film was something that not only was really of no interest to me, but one that I was actually pretty against. However, once the idea of this film was something that was more clearly laid out and the general sort of conceit of the film was explained, then I actually began to not only be more accepting of this idea of the movie, but actually genuinely really looking forward to it. Because in essence, this is not a Buzz Lightyear origin story. I mean, it kind of is, but not really in the way that you might think. Because within the universe of Toy Story, Andy is thrilled to get this toy. The toy, of course, being Buzz Lightyear, Space Ranger. But in this movie, the one that's in theaters right now, is the movie that Andy would have seen back in 1995. The movie that he saw, that he became obsessed with, that made him want that toy so badly. Think of it like this. If Andy hadn't gotten a Buzz Lightyear action figure and instead got a toy of, let's say Luke Skywalker, the movie that we would be seeing, the one that I'm reviewing right now, would be Star Wars. So think of this movie like Andy's Star Wars or Star Trek or something like that. But something that surprised me about this film is how it's not just Star Wars or Star Trek, but with Buzz Lightyear instead. There are, of course, yes, obvious references to both of those series, but this film also has the DNA of some other incredibly influential sci-fi films like 2001: A Space Odyssey, Lost in Space, and Alien, among other things. This film really is a mixture of a lot of those movies, as well as just other pulpy sci-fi adventure stories, and it feels not necessarily specific enough to seem like it's cheap or a pale imitation of those works, but it also feels general enough to be reminiscent of those films or those works that have inspired so many people in the real world, like this movie, essentially inspires Andy. Which beyond, just telling a film that feels like it's reminiscent of the Buzz Lightyear that we all know and love, this movie does really have the unique task of seeming like it would be the type of film to capture the imagination of Andy. And for the most part, I could see that happening in the same way that, say, something like Star Trek captured the imagination of a whole generation of fans. However, to me, if this movie is trying to appear to be a film that would be this revolution, that would just rock Andy's world, I just don't think that this movie is quite imaginative enough or really has that many elements to it that I think would be awe-inspiring, as I would sort of expect this film to be. But before we dive into that idea, I really want to talk about the portrayal in this film of Buzz Lightyear, who in this movie is brought to life with the voice of Chris Evans as opposed to Tim Allen. And although this may be kind of a controversial idea to recast such an iconic role, I do really love the idea that Tim Allen's voice for Buzz Lightyear is like the toy knockoff version, It's the 90s, it's an action figure. They couldn't get the real actor to come in, so they hired this voice actor to do the best that they could. I know that might be kind of sacrilege, but I think it's kind of a fun, novel idea. And I really do think that with this film, they really successfully capture the essence that we would get of Buzz Lightyear in that first film. Because Evans in this movie is not portraying Buzz Lightyear from Toy Story 3 or 4 or even 2. No, instead in this movie, his performance is written in the way and is performed in a way with the personality of the Buzz Lightyear that we see fresh out of the box in that first film. Because that is the default Buzz Lightyear in a way, and that has the personality that we would come to expect to see in a movie that toy is based off of. And from that perspective, I think he is portrayed very well in the film. He does have this very mission first, straight down the middle sort of attitude about him, but at the center of it all is someone who cares deeply for others and who is willing to risk everything because of his friends. It's actually something that plays directly into his arc throughout this film, in fact. Because throughout the movie, we see Buzz go through this journey of trust and allowing others and yourself to let go and not be defined by your failure. Buzz is someone who has an extreme dedication to his duty and his mandate as a space ranger, and when he falls short of these expectations that he has for himself, how does that affect him? And also, how does it affect the way that he sees others when they fail? See, Buzz is a legendary space ranger and one of the best, it seems, and so when others aren't able to live up to his own abilities, how does that affect his perception of them? This movie is really having this conversation about that failure, your own failure to live up to your expectations you put on yourself because of your own high standards or the precedent that is set before you, which is great. Unfortunately, the film doesn't really go any deeper than that or explore these ideas in a way that I found to be pretty predictable and not as layered as I would maybe hope for a Pixar movie, a studio that has been shown to be very capable of exploring incredibly complex and mature themes, but doing so in a nuanced way. I even made a whole video about this idea when I took a look at Toy Story 4, in fact. And this film does approach these ideas and it does explore this motif very thoroughly, but I think its exploration of this idea I did find to be pretty one-note and pretty predictable. In fact, I think from the first few moments of this movie, I probably could have offered a pretty square assumption about the lessons and the ideas that this movie would try to explore, and to be honest, I really wasn't that far off. Not to say that this movie has to completely blow my mind and be incredibly complex and revolutionary and offer such a unique and new perspective on this idea, even though Pixar has done that before, but I think it could have tackled this idea from more facets and from more directions. Because I think one of the reasons why this idea is not as explored in a way that as maybe could be as interesting as it could possibly be is due in part to the supporting characters of this film, who I did find to be pretty forgettable. Izzy Hawthorne and Socks being the exception to this idea. The first of whom, Izzy, I thought was terrific, with a wonderful performance from Keke Palmer. I thought this character really did add to the depth to these ideas like I was talking about. This film explores and approaches this idea of personal failure, and her character, the way that she relates to that motif and to that theme, really offers a perspective that approaches it from a different direction. Socks, however, is a robot cat who shoots tranquilizer darts out of its mouth, so yeah, what's not to love? The other two characters in this film that are really of note, being Darby and Mo, I found to be very underwhelming, and where I thought there was room for them to add complexity or depth to the story like Izzy did, I found them mostly to just be kind of an obstacle plot-wise that Buzz has to overcome, which kind of made them pretty one-dimensional and quite bland, unfortunately, and are more oftentimes than not just relegated to be characters that offer levity and humor throughout the film. And something else that I did find to be a little bland with Lightyear is the setting of the movie, which is mostly taking place on this one planet, as well as some interiors of some spaceships and hangars and such. And I found this to be quite surprising because, as a Star Wars fan, something that this movie obviously is taking inspiration from to some degree, one of the many things that I find so iconic about those movies, and I would say even with Star Trek, are the far and away and exotic planets that you travel to across those films and the series as well. And for the most part, I found this planet in which this movie takes place on, this one planet, to be very underwhelming, and where there could have been an opportunity to provide not only a unique challenge for these characters narratively, or at least at the minimum, offer something visually engaging or even distinctive looking at all, that's really where the film lacks for myself. Instead, this planet mostly just feels like it's, Mars. It's the desert. There's mountains and rock faces. I feel like I can drive an hour and a half north and see something pretty similar to that. It doesn't really feel like this incredibly unique and far off world. I mean, yeah, if you're looking at like the original Star Trek series or even Star Wars for that matter, both of those series and films had a very limited budget when they were first made, and their resources to explore these ideas weren't terribly vast. So George Lucas went out to Death Valley and shot stuff because that's what he had. Those were the resources that he had. Whereas Pixar has a lot more financial back-in and could offer something that is visually stunning. And like I said, also nothing to sneeze at, just offer a unique challenge for our characters, something that is environmental that they have to overcome. And lest we forget, it's also just, kind of ugly, which is surprising coming from Pixar. And it's even more surprising too, because the rest of this movie truly looks gorgeous. This film is clearly striving for a quality to it that seems more naturalistic and more cinematic, if you will. Again, emulating a movie that Andy would see in theaters. And on that front, this film is stunning. It's been a few years since seeing a Pixar movie in theaters, and to see this film not only on the big screen, but utilize an IMAX format, which is pretty unique to Pixar, to see the sweat dripping down the characters' faces and all of the detail that is laid out on screen, paired with the phenomenal score by Michael Giacchino blasting through those loudspeakers, this film really is a sensory splendor. And I think if you had a setting that was a little bit more visually or narratively engaging, I think you would just add to that and add to that sense of awe and wonder that we as an audience would feel, but also Andy would feel back in the 1990s. And I know it sounds like I'm really being kind of tough on this film, and it's because, I am. I was that kid, like Andy, who loved Buzz Lightyear growing up. As I said, the Toy Story movies are immensely important to me, and seeing a film that is based on one of those characters, one of the lead characters of that series, is going to be something that is very personal and important to me. And for the most part, yes, this film does live up to the Pixar legacy and the quality of films that you would expect to see from Pixar from an animated level as well as a narrative level too. But it also lives up to the idea of what I would want from a movie like this, which would be this fun, action-packed space adventure film. Lightyear features this exciting sense of action and adventure, like I said, but also, it does feature animation that is set apart and a killer score from Michael Giacchino, as I said. However, the film really does lack this sense of exceptionalism that we have come to expect from Pixar, and is more often times than not just kind of like in the mid-tier of what I would expect, Pixar's typical fare to be. And that's due in part because the approach that this film has to dissecting these themes and motifs I found to be pretty one-dimensional and does lack a bit of surprise, along with its forgettable setting and characters. Don't get me wrong, Lightyear is a fun movie. I think it's one that kids are really going to enjoy, especially if they're that 8, 9, 10-year-old range, but I still don't think it's a film that is going to capture that sense of imagination and spark that feeling of awe like it did for Andy, and is more likely going to be seen as what I think this movie is, which is, a very fun sci-fi adventure film, and not really too much more. So did you guys see Lightyear? Where does it rank for you, not only in regards to the other Toy Story films, but the other movies that Pixar have offered in recent years? Leave your thoughts and opinions down below. I would love to hear them. And as always, guys, thank you so much for watching today. I hope you liked today's video, and if you did, you can click that link down below so you can subscribe to my channel to see more movie reviews and movie-related things. Again, guys, thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.